All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into that feeling we all know. Why does everything feel so expensive? Why do big life goals like buying a house feel like they're just slipping further and further away? We're going to break down a very specific argument that's been making the rounds about what's really going on with the value of your money. I mean, this is the question, right? You feel like you're doing everything you're supposed to, you're working hard, you're trying to save, but it's like the goalposts keep moving, especially with housing. So, what's really going on here? Well, let's unpack one very pointed explanation for this. Okay, so here's the core claim from our source material. It's a really bold statement, and it pretty much sets the stage for everything else. It's directly connecting the financial struggles young people are facing today with the decisions made by politicians. The whole idea here is that you're starting out in a tougher spot than your parents were, and it's not because of some vague market forces. Nope, this argument points the finger directly at government spending. So, this argument basically breaks the problem down into two main causes. Let's start with the first one, which the source calls an addiction to deficit spending. Now, before we go any further, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with this term. Deficit spending is actually pretty simple. It's when the government's expenses are way higher than its income, the money it brings in from taxes and stuff. To make up the difference, it has to borrow. This idea is absolutely key to understanding the whole argument we're looking at. And this is how that idea is framed. You got to pay attention to the language here. Using a word like addicted is a very deliberate choice. It's meant to suggest this isn't a one-off thing or an emergency measure. It's painting a picture of a constant systemic problem of overspending that's just become business as usual. All right, let's move on to the second part of this argument. This one shifts the spotlight from the politicians over to the nation's central bank, the Federal Reserve, and looks at what it's doing behind the scenes in the financial system. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because the argument lays out this kind of chain reaction. It goes something like this. Step one, a big bank gets into trouble. Step two, the Federal Reserve, the Fed, steps in. By buying up the troubled bank's assets, like its bonds, it's essentially pumping new money into the economy. And notice that key word from the source, artificially. The suggestion is that this isn't a natural or healthy expansion of the money supply. So you've got two alleged culprits here. First, the government constantly overspending, and second, the central bank creating more money to deal with financial hiccups. According to this perspective, when you put those two things together, you get a powerful 1-2 punch that lands right on your wallet. So what's the end result of all this? What happens when you boost the money supply? Well, the argument is pretty blunt about it. It makes you poorer. But how? How does that actually work? And this slide is a great way to picture what's happening. Think of the entire economy like a big pizza. If there's less money in circulation, let's say the pizza is cut into just 4 slices, each slice or each dollar is a pretty big and valuable piece. But if you flood the system with new money, it's like cutting that same pizza into 100 tiny slivers. Each individual piece is now worth a whole lot less. It just doesn't go as far. That's the core idea of inflation being presented here. And according to the source, this isn't just some abstract theory. It has real-world consequences with a very specific timeline. The argument predicts that because of all this, that dream of owning a home we talked about in the beginning, it's going to be out of reach for a lot of young people for the next decade and a half. So this isn't framed as a short-term blip, but a long-term penalty that's hitting an entire generation's biggest financial goals. So let's see how this all gets wrapped up. What's the final, overarching conclusion to this whole line of reasoning? And here you have it. The argument ends by claiming that this whole issue isn't about being left-wing or right-wing. It's not a partisan problem. It's presented as a simple, undeniable economic fact. It's positioned as a fundamental truth about how money works, no matter which party is in power. So we've just walked through one very clear cause and effect argument for why your dollar doesn't stretch as far as it used to. It points the finger squarely at government deficit spending and the actions of the Federal Reserve. But, and this is really important, you have to remember this is just one piece of a much, much bigger and very complicated economic puzzle. Other economists will point to completely different things, like global supply chain messes, huge shifts in what people are buying, or even corporate pricing decisions. The full story behind inflation is almost never simple, and that's exactly what makes it one of the toughest challenges we're facing today.